Hi everyone, I'm Anna. I'm based here in Sheffield. I'm wearing what can only be described as a kind of circus ringmaster's bright green jacket and a necklace made by a local artist called Beth Pegler. I'm delighted to welcome Christina Lister from Museum Freelancer, Sonali Joshi from Excluded UK, and Joe Taylor from DILEF for Freelancer also. Hi everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
So as Maddie just said, and Hugh also this morning, I wrote down his quote about freelancers being somewhat cut loose, which was kind of perfectly potted phrase from Hugh. In my intro, I was thinking about the fact I work as an artist, a freelancer, a mother, consultant. I consider these all forms of work, and really the thing they have in common typically is that they're generally unpaid, and certainly are at the moment. We've prepared a lot as a panel, and I think, you know, hopefully that will come, the themes of what we want to talk about will come through really strongly. As I've warned you guys, I'm going to try and keep us quite tightly to time so that we can make sure that what is happening in the chat is represented and respond to the questions that you hopefully will have for us. I'm going to leave Jo to talk more about DILEF for Freelancer in her session. We're going to hear first of all from Christina, then Sonali, and then from Jo. And then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves and with you via the chat. So Christina, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, perfect. Hi everyone, really pleased to join you today. My name is Christina Lister. I'm a marketing consultant. I've been freelancing for the last 8 years, but I'm really here in my capacity as co-director of Museum Freelance. I've been asked to share a bit about some of the work we do and a survey we ran today. So I've got a few slides prepared that will just illustrate that for you. Thank you very much. So yeah, Museum Freelance, we started about 5 years ago, have grown really organically from there, just started with a Twitter account with the idea of trying to pull together freelancers that work with museums, galleries, heritage sites, archives and libraries, because really often they feel quite isolated, and it was just an idea of trying to bring them together, help them share ideas, issues, challenges, jobs and so on. And we've grown kind of year on year in baby steps. So pre-COVID, we were running an annual conference and training sessions like in-person ones, but really we've spent the bulk of this year, for quite obvious reasons, just doing a lot of advocacy and lobbying work. So we're now set up as a limited company as of September this year, but actually about 95% of the work that I do with my co-director, Marge Ainsley, 95% of the work we do is actually in a voluntary capacity. So I've been asked to share a bit about a big piece of research we did. So anecdotally, we feel we know roughly who the freelancers are in our sector and their needs and challenges, but it's never been documented. So Character Matters, which was a big sort of sector workforce survey 4 years ago, found that there were about 4.8% of the workforce in museums is freelance. I suspect that that figure is much higher now, but there's nothing really known about them. So we set out to find out a bit more and be able to really use that as an evidence base to lobby on freelancers' behalf. So just at a glance, we had 314 respondents, which we're really pleased with because it was a beast of a survey. 83% identified as female, which is obviously much higher than the UK population as a whole, but also much higher than the museum's workforce, employed workforce. 16% said their day-to-day activities were limited by a health problem or disability, which again is much higher than the museum sector workforce employed positions. 94% described their ethnicity as white, so they're massively overrepresented. And interestingly, about 50% work part-time, so either exclusively freelancing part-time or combining freelance work alongside employment, which we're seeing more and more and more because a lot of those employed positions are now turning into part-time contracts and fixed-term contracts, and also combining it with studying. So just to highlight a few of our key findings, motivations for going freelance. At the top, all the things you'd expect really, so things like flexibility, freedom, work-life balance, to be my own boss, to fit around, you know, personal circumstances. But at the bottom, it was interesting, we noted that, you know, about 1 in 5 turned freelance because they were unable to find employed work. And bearing in mind this survey was conducted earlier this year, I suspect that figure, if we did the survey next year, would be much higher. And similarly, 16% because they're being made redundant. So they're not choosing necessarily to go freelance as a proactive career choice, but perhaps being forced into it just so they can stay in our sector. We looked at the sort of work that freelancers do, and it's just brilliant to see a huge variety. At the top, we've got things like project management and exhibitions for anything from conservation, coaching, decolonization consultancy, which is sort of on the increase, a huge range. And it was also really important for us to document the additional work that freelancers do in an unpaid capacity for the sector to really champion what freelancers are doing. So you can see here, it's a variety from sharing their knowledge on social media. So we have like Museum Hour on Twitter once a week, for example, speaking at conferences in an unpaid capacity, doing unpaid mentoring, sitting on boards, being a trustee, but also the dark blue one there, the stuff that maybe shouldn't be unpaid. So supporting funding bids in an unpaid capacity, or over-servicing, so doing more work for a client than they're really being paid to do. Day rates was a huge one we looked at, and the report we've got dives into this in a lot more detail. We've got freelance day rates by role broken down as well, but we found that the majority charge about £201 to £400 a day, but 6% charge less than £100 a day and 18% less than £150 a day. And actually, when you start accounting for the fact that freelancers need to cover their holiday days and sick days, contribute to their own pension, pay all their tax and national insurance, all the expenses that freelancers have that often clients don't realise they have, and account for the fact that however efficient you are, you can't spend 100% of your time on fee earning work you can bill someone for. If you're accounting for all of that, then actually some of those low day rates don't really equate to comparatively to the real living wage or the national minimum wage. So in the report, we have loads of qualitative sort of quotes that we pulled out that freelancers have contributed. And here's just a few examples. Some day rates are too low to provide a living wage. Work's often underpaid when the actual hours are tallied. But on the positive, some of the benefits of freelancing: flexibility, control, variety, being my own boss, freedom, again, all the things you'd probably expect. And we were really pleased to note that despite the challenges that freelancers face, about a third noted improved mental health as one of the benefits of freelancing. But equally, the flip side, some of the challenges then, so balancing your time, imposter syndrome, some of these are things that internally freelancers have to battle with. Saving for a pension is on there. 57% of freelancers that responded aren't currently contributing to a pension, which, we're really concerned about and feel that's a bit of a ticking time bomb if we're thinking longer term. But the ones we've highlighted are the ones that we think that actually organisations in our sector can do something about quite simply. So, poor client briefs, late payments, which are inexcusable. And we have a lot of really overwhelming procurement processes. So often local authority run organisations, they will do really cumbersome procurement processes, asking you to have all sorts of documents in place, like a modern slavery statement, all these things that really are more relevant to big kind of capital projects and building projects, and not freelance contracts that are worth £500 or £2,000. And sadly, only 47% of freelancers feel recognised and valued in the sector. And I think this is such a big issue. It's not even just about not being paid enough, really, or being paid on time. It's just that feeling of not being seen to be core part of the workforce and being included. And only 12% feel supported from sector organisations. So in our sector, they are organisations like Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund. They're the sort of two big funding organisations. Also Museums Association, Association for Independent Museums. There's a whole variety of organisations that haven't really to date been that inclusive of freelancers. So we asked freelancers what changes they'd like to see, and then it was an open question. So we grouped and themed all their responses. And these were the main ones then that came out. So improving day rates and fee-related issues, fairer procurement processes, more recognition and inclusion from the sector, equality of support with PAYE or employed workforce, and greater visibility of opportunities, because often work is kind of handed out behind closed doors and a lot of people don't get a look in. And then we set out some recommendations for organisations, for freelancers themselves, and for us as Museum Freelance, because we see very much that we all have a part to play in tackling and improving the situation. So for organisations, firstly, valuing freelancers. Secondly, consulting with and including them. And this can really be as simple as just on like an event booking form or a survey that goes out into the sector, just having an option you could tick that says you're self-employed and not forcing people to say what museum, for example, they work for. Providing affordable opportunities open to freelancers, because currently a lot of the training that's subsidised by the sector isn't open to freelancers. And we very much feel that if a freelancer goes on a training course, they can then take that learning to maybe 10 organisations they work with across the year. So it's really good for the sector if they are able to come on those courses. And then the last two, which we have to really tackle sort of as a sector as a whole, improving procurement processes and contractual issues as well. But also for freelancers, we're very much encouraging them to think like a business. I think in the sort of cultural heritage sector, a lot of people freelancers because they just love the subject matter and they just love the sector. And I think that can really hamper their decision-making processes. So we're also saying get informed about your rights and responsibilities. So responsibilities, things like, you know, if you're dealing with data, you might have to register with the Information Commissioner's Office. But equally your rights, so things like you have a legal right, according to the government HMRC, to charge interest and a late payment charge if payments are late from clients. So, you know, just being aware of all those sorts of things. And then once you know your rights, making sure you assert them. We also encourage everyone to get involved in our community and also just recognise and shout about their achievements and give themselves a pat on the back. And in terms of what we're going to do next, we're sharing the research findings as much as possible. We want to start delivering some online training, especially in some of the areas that have been identified in the survey that there are gaps in people's knowledge and maybe confidence. We also in the new year are going to create a panel of really diverse voices, underrepresented and marginalised voices and perspectives. We're also going to develop some campaigns and seek some funding because, like I said, the majority of the work we do is in a voluntary capacity. I'm just very briefly going to wrap up by touching on a poll we've just ran in the last couple of weeks and the results of which we publicised yesterday, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on freelancers in our sector. So 78% have experienced a decrease in their income compared to last year, which is obviously a really high number. But really, quite shockingly, only 47% have been eligible for the government self-employed income support scheme, so 53% haven't. So I suppose, just to kind of conclude really, interestingly, like I said at the start, whilst anecdotally we knew a lot of this information, I think until it's there in black and white, the statistics with those qualitative quotes that bring things to life, it's been really easy for organisations in our sector to ignore freelancers, whereas now I think we've had this survey, we've had our recent poll, they're newsworthy, they've been getting interest, getting attention, and I think that's really leading to some conversations and discussions and dialogue that are starting to create and spark change. And I think one of the main things as well that's been positive to come out of this is that freelancers, just by being able to contribute to the surveys, have felt that someone's listening to them, someone's responsive, and have been really encouraged by that someone's valuing them. So that's it from me. Both the big survey report and the recent poll I mentioned are available to view on our website, museumfreelance.org/resources. They're both at the top there. And you know, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to get in touch either during this presentation or afterwards by email. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. We're going to hear from Sonali in a minute. I wanted to kind of pose a question really to our audience, which was sort of really on my mind as I was kind of preparing for this session and as I've been listening to earlier sessions in the conference, especially where they're pertinent to freelancing or where freelancing has been mentioned. And I just would like you to bear in mind, where does responsibility lie for freelancers? So specifically in our industry or our specific sectors within the film industry, where do you feel the responsibility for freelancers' well-being, prosperousness, etc. lies? Sonali, thanks very much for joining us. In our brief conversation a week or so ago, I know how exceptionally busy you've been, and I think you're going to give us a bit of a flavour of that now.
Thanks, Anna. So my name is Sonali Joshi. I'm the director of a small limited company called Day for Night, working across film exhibition and distribution of underrepresented areas of cinema. and access services for film and the arts. So that's subtitles, translation, and audio description. And I work with a large team of freelancers, and I equally work as a freelance curator and writer alongside. So my work was affected by the pandemic quite early on, because I was wrapping up what was to be a 3-year Japan-focused curatorial project due to launch this year. I was in Japan towards the start of the year, living everything a few steps ahead of what was happening in the UK. I was actually stranded there until June, so that put an end to whatever I was planning to launch in June. Having seen the impacts on the exhibition sector in Japan early on in the year, I took a very early decision to just put a pause to the project. I then soon realised that many of the freelancers I work with, as well as myself, would be among the many excluded from meaningful government support. I began lobbying actively, particularly in relation to the creative industries. And on the back of that, I came together with 3 other small business owners to form Excluded UK in May. So this was some weeks after lockdown. Having realised the scale of the issue and the extent of the exclusions, in the government support schemes and their complexities. So I've gone from my regular daily work of curating and subtitling films to now spending most of my time talking to MPs, parliamentary bodies, unions and industry bodies. So Excluded UK is a volunteer-run grassroots organisation established in response to the financial challenges faced by individuals and businesses entirely or largely excluded from the government COVID-19 financial support schemes. We exist to raise awareness of the many exclusions in the schemes and their impacts, whilst also offering a space for those who've been affected and offering what support we're able to provide. The bedrock of the organisation is a Facebook group of 25,000 members and growing daily. This represents people across diverse sectors and industries and all employment statuses. From an initial survey that we ran in June with around 3,000 respondents, we found that around 30% from the creative industries, and so from our data, this certainly represents the largest grouping of those affected that we can see within our own community. And this is really quite staggering. Alongside the political lobbying that we do, many of our initiatives have therefore naturally involved a creative dimension. In the summer, we ran a campaign called 3 Million Miles UK. The aim was to get people to tell their stories, raise awareness whilst walking, running, cycling or other forms of movement, particularly through video and photography. We have set up an Excluded UK virtual choir, which stemmed from an idea between a screenwriter based in London and a music teacher based in Glasgow, and together they've formed a very strong nationwide virtual choir. We've been involved very closely with Beck2. We were involved in their Panto Parade in September. We're in the process of setting up a collaboration with Culture Commons, which is going to be a series of regional panels around the country to assess where next for the creative industries. And we've also been liaising with Creatives in Crisis, which is an academic research project on how the pandemic has affected those working within the creative industries. So we really see the creative industries as a microcosm of the broader picture, the impacts that have been widely felt on communities, towns, cities, high streets, people's lives more broadly in terms of entertainment and recreation. And of course, the workers within the creative industries, the fabric of the creative sectors, the uncertainty that we face, many with no ability to get back to work, some having to leave their industry, which also raises concerns about future skills shortages. And ultimately, we all have a long road to recovery across the creative industries and beyond. So from the initial data analysis that we conducted, we estimate that there are 3 million UK taxpayers who've been denied meaningful support through the 2 government schemes. There seems to be no policy rationale behind these exclusions, but rather arbitrary hard edges to the eligibility criteria, which have resulted in huge disparities. And this figure of 3 million is based principally on data from HMRC and ONS, and it has been backed up by various organisations, including the National Audit Office, which puts the figure at 2.9 million. And there's no doubt that freelancers, the self-employed, small limited company directors are by far the largest groupings that are affected and are very disproportionately affected. The impacts of these exclusions are really quite profound and being compounded month by month, with knock-on effects on children, education, single parents, families, the elderly, the disabled, those who are shielding, and then employees, freelancers, and supply chains more broadly. And we know that the longer-term impacts are only set to become more acute. Escalating financial hardship, mounting debt, failed businesses, and alongside all of this, an increasingly severe mental health crisis. Back in June, we also conducted another survey very specifically around creative industries. And I think this sort of marries up quite a bit with what Christina was sharing with us a little while earlier. We found that 68% of respondents said that they had no work and none on the horizon. This also parallels what our colleagues in theatre tell us, that approximately 70% of theatre freelancers are in the same position. We also conducted a much broader survey of around 3,000 responses, which had some really quite staggering findings. 72% said that they were now on less than 20% of their pre-COVID income. 60% had no income or work, none on the horizon. 80% had not been able to access either of the two schemes, and 61% not eligible for universal credit. We conducted a follow-up survey at the end of October. Those figures are slightly lower, and we put that down to the fact that over the course of the months that have passed, naturally, people have had to find other means of income. A lot of people have moved out of their industries, just taken whatever work they could. But we still found that 72% of people were now saying that they couldn't access universal credit. So 8 months, in fact, more than 8 months have now passed since the schemes were announced. We certainly feel that there's been ample time to address the situation. And the spending review last week was, of course, the ideal opportunity to do so, to no avail, not least to aid the country's economic recovery and future growth. And for us, within all of this, there are two key things that have emerged. We feel that there really is a sheer lack of understanding of the landscape of freelancing, what it means to be a freelancer, self-employed, a small limited company on government's part. And equally, the welfare system has not provided any form of safety net. And of course, universal credit, we don't deem that to be meaningful support for the few people who are able to access it. So what we're calling for is parity, but we're equally taking on board a range of ideas from industry bodies, unions, MPs. We're also talking about pushing for an emergency hardship fund and some form of universal basic income. Essentially, people just need a bridge to be able to get through and emerge from the crisis. Of course, that goes in tandem with the fact that people have gone. With the two schemes that have been extended up to March, that will represent a whole year that people will have gone without support if nothing changes before then. We urge the Chancellor to meet with us, affected individuals, the all-party parliamentary group that we established, which is actually the largest in history with, I believe it's 262 MPs, so that he can see and hear for himself that these individuals and businesses are viable and we need urgent support. And the creative industries will be very much at the heart of that message. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali. I think at this point, if we were all in the room together, I would ask for a raise of hands. So thinking about a remote way to do that. If you feel able or are able, in the chat, if you are part of the Excluded, please do indicate that in some way. I'll do a little wave for me. We're going to swiftly move on to Jo to give us a very potted history of DILF and where we're at right now. And then we'll move into a discussion amongst the four of us.
Hi everyone, so I'm Jo Taylor-Hitchinson. I'm one of the co-founders of DILF for Freelancer. Just to give you kind of a very brief history of who we are and where we're hoping to go. So my colleague Toki Allison ran a session This Way Up last year around freelancing. this kind of then emerged from it. And then, of course, what the pandemic's done is accelerate everything and put everything under a microscope. So 3 of us came together. That was Toki Allison, Moira McBean and myself. And we created the UK Film Exhibition and Distribution Network Facebook group back in March. And that was in an absolute response to what was happening with regards to lockdown. For me, it very much felt like nobody knew where support was coming from. Organisations weren't necessarily being very forthcoming with support or information in those early days. And we felt that it was important for freelancers who sometimes lack a community, that they did have somewhere that they could try and find out information, or if they found something, they could signpost it as well. As things went on, we realised that we didn't just want it to be this Facebook group that's popped up because of what the pandemic has brought about. We wanted it to be bigger than that. We wanted a legacy to come from it. And so then we saw the community grants that the film and TV charity were doing earlier in the year. So we applied for some funding to create DILF for Freelancer. And essentially what we were trying to do is create a platform and a network for freelancers, but for also all those organisations, distributors, exhibitors, festivals, and everyone in between that uses freelancers. So there's actually a directory of exhibition and distribution freelancers in existence that formerly didn't exist. We're starting to try and build that now at the moment. The film industry, and I would hazard a guess, a lot of the creative industries it's not what you know, it's who you know. People are past work because they have connections with people, and it's not necessarily the most effective way, we think, to kind of give opportunities to everyone. So yes, we built the platform. It launched in October, and it was put together by a brilliant steering group of volunteers, which included Anna, and we also were able to use the funding to get a web designer and web developer in, and someone in to help with our graphics as well. What we're hoping is that it becomes an inclusive community, and I think that's a really key word, and a word that we don't hear associated with freelancing is community, is that we don't have a forum in the same way that our employed colleagues sometimes do. As mentioned, we're pretty much a volunteer-run project. I exclusively freelance. Others within the group may have paid roles, contracted roles, part-time, fixed-term contracts, all of those things. So again, like, we're a broad church. I think Sonali and Christina have said it as well. It's freelancing just isn't one thing. You can't put everybody in the same box. There's lots of different permutations of being a freelancer. We're really proud of what we've done, but we're also incredibly frustrated as well. We're really proud because out of something awful, we created something that's been needed, that we feel, for a very, very long time. We're also frustrated that it's fallen to us to do it. We're the ones in the most precarious working positions, and we're supporting other people as well as supporting ourselves. I think we all know that the creative sector relies heavily on the knowledge and expertise of freelancers to make their projects, their campaigns, their festivals, their releases a success. And it is time that we were properly recognised. This movement, DILF, is the result of free work and people's time and energy. It's work that should have been done by the industry organisations many years ago. So this is kind of my call out to everybody that's benefited from having a freelancer as part of their team at one time or another. Your support says everything, and your silence speaks volumes. Like, now is the time you need to act, and you need to support us. Not just in film, I think across, we've illustrated across lots of creative sectors, now's the time for change. Anna, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think you've spelled it out very clearly, but it reminds me that, once we were launched, a peer said, it's fantastic, but this work should have been done by people who have a salary. And it's a kind, I don't know whether bittersweet is the right word, but it is that thing of that kind of tension between feeling very proud of doing something and putting kind of time and energy and expertise into something that you can feel very pleased about the kind of results of, whilst simultaneously feeling, as you say, extremely frustrated. I think especially the online reaction we got when we launched was interesting. You know, like, wow, this is fantastic. How did you get this work done? Oh my gosh, this has been needed for so long. And I suppose another question I would pose to the conference room, if you like, is what can you do to support freelancers? Are you thinking about that? Freelancers can't access the same funds that are available at the moment. Are you thinking about the freelancers you've worked with before when you put those funding applications together? If you are a funder, are you thinking about challenging, you know, the kind of source of your funds for kind of why those kind of eligibility reasons kind of exist? I think, do you want to, Jo, start to sort of touch on some of the headlines that are emerging from our initial workshop? What I'll just explain is that we've talked about and sort of heavily previewed, I suppose, this idea of a DILEF for Freelancer code of conduct. It's very much a live document for the kind of reasons of the tension I've described, in that we are pulling this work together voluntarily, but also we're not able or keen to speak on behalf of kind of what is a massive sector. So the initial workshop was very much to begin to gather headlines, and there's still lots of opportunities to contribute, and our colleagues Toki and Moira in the chat will help clarify that.
Yeah, and absolutely, I should have foregrounded it at the beginning. We don't feel that we speak for everybody, and we absolutely want to hear from everyone as well. So if you're not already part of DILEF, please do get in touch and sign up and get yourself a profile. And also, just to touch on, like, we have had some industry support, the FDA, UK Film and TV Charity, Altitude, Bohemia and E1 all gave us funding to make the platform, to get the platform live, and, you know, had substantial support. So it means that we don't have to worry about sourcing funding for things like the hosting of the platform for the next year or so, which is really important for us. As Anna said, we had a kind of brainstorming session about how we'd want a code of conduct to look, and it's I'm going to repeat what Christina said here, because it's not unsurprisingly, it's the same kind of things that exhibition and distribution people are feeling in film. Like, the headlines that came out for us is a duty of care and well-being were two really important things. You know, we believe anybody that's employing or contracting a freelancer has a duty of care towards them. I think the pandemic's you know, magnified this massively. You know, we're also calling on those organisations within exhibition and distribution, people like BECTI, the BFI, the UK Cinema Association, Film and TV Charity, Film Distribution Association and Screen Skills, to engage with us as freelancers and make sure that duty of care protocols are in place for freelancers working on projects. If you call sessions earlier in the week, there's a lot of talk about film production, but when it comes to exhibition and distribution, it's not getting the same attention, and we really need to do something to change that mindset and change that culture, because, you know, we're valuable as well, and I think it's important that we push that forward. Wellbeing, as I just said, this featured really heavily in conversations. You know, as a freelancer, you're required to be your own HR, your own PR and your own ER. You're responsible for everything, and that is a lot, and it does, you do have to kind of have resilience to get through that. You know, earlier in the week, the Film and TV Charity kind of spoke through their bigger picture report that they did, and they've identified mental health as kind of a key concern for film workers. You know, they're doing work with helplines, they've had these grants, and it's great. But we do feel like more needs to happen, and we're hoping that the work that they're doing is kind of going to be reflective of everybody in the film industry, not just certain sectors. And then I think it must be the biggest bugbear for any freelancer, it's the pay rates and timescales as well. more transparency. We don't have rate cards. We don't have any kind of, this is comparatively what, if you're an audience development consultant, this is what you should be doing. If, you're a curator, this is what it should be. That because there's so many roles, I suppose, within the sector and freelancing, it does feel like there needs to be some kind of parity on what's happening. Late payments, we all had frequent discussions and shared like war stories of having to chase for payment, and it devalues the work, and it devalues you when you have to kind of demand payment for work that you've done, that you've made a project a success for a client, yet you're having to chase for payment. That's something else that came out. And transparency, I've touched upon it already. It's an old boys network, and that needs to change. We need to be open to everybody having an opportunity, and also balancing that out with what the commercial expectation of a client is versus giving someone the experience as a freelancer on a project that might not have done something like that before. And especially when it comes to funded projects, and certain prerequisites need to happen, that we need to kind of all work together to make sure that freelancers are actually part of the project, that they're a proactive element of it and not just a reactive element that's brought on at a certain stage, because the results that you get aren't going to be the best that they can possibly be.
There was, Joe, that's prompted me to remember there was, I think, a really interesting kind of trend in the discussion that emerged in the workshop about pressure, I suppose, for want of a better word. So pressure of timescales passed on by often the funder. So pressure on targets, pressure to deliver, pressure to recruit. And I think it's a really tricky thing, because ultimately I think what you're describing very well is that it cascades down to the freelancer who suffers. And, quite often people were talking about their experience of being brought in as the specialist voice, or the lived experience, or the kind of representative person or individual for, that really the entire project hinged on, but they are, still sort of the last person in receipt of the pay brief, access to senior staff. It is really this kind of hierarchical thing of being the sort of end of the line point, really. Sort of coming back to you, Christina, I was interested in that slide that sort of talked about actually kind of formalizing, or kind of being able to articulate what all of that kind of unpaid work looks like. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So this idea of, the advice you provide, etc.
Sorry, the unpaid contributions of freelancers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's partly really about understanding what freelancers bring to your sector. And it isn't just that you are a commercial supplier, like a commodity, this disposable resource that you commission, kind of milk dry, and then you reject, and I think someone's just put in the chat this idea, that more and more people are freelancing and employed, and it's a lot more fluid, maybe out of choice, maybe out of necessity. And I just think that, society, our sectors, organizations have to understand that, we're all part of that ecosystem, and we should be invested in, because that is for the benefit of everyone. There's so much that freelancers can bring to the table, but it isn't just about exploiting them or using them in that commercial way. So I think, understanding the broader range of things that freelancers contribute, whether it is just about your skills and expertise or the softer things. But I sort of see freelancers often as cross-pollinators. You learn so much from working on so many different projects, and you're able to take those lessons to the next step and share those so widely. That's a massively positive asset, I think, in any sector.
Yeah, it's just coming back. I wanted to ask all of you, actually, something that we're kind of referring to a lot, and is certainly coming out in the responses we're all getting back from our networks, is this sort of sense of kind of representation and visibility and advocacy. Because actually, I was thinking about what I asked you, Christina, and how do you push back? Because often the most cited fear is that you won't get work again. If you speak up, you won't get work again. Or if you're difficult, you won't get work again. Do the three of you feel braver in any way at the moment? Have the networks that you're part of given you a kind of concrete sense of sort of a boost in confidence, or not? Jo?
Okay, go first. I think I've just quite honestly, and being utterly candid, I'm kind of fed up that it's kind of things have got to this point, and that we're all sitting here talking about this, and we're all that we're having this conversation, and that I don't want the situation to be the same in a year's time, that we're still talking about things in the same way. Like we all volunteer our time because we recognised that there was a need, that we're plugging a gap. So I do feel more confident in it. I do sometimes worry the fact that my mouth runs away with me a little bit, but I do feel passionate about it. I've been doing, freelancing for a fair while now. I've built up a wonderful network of colleagues and friends, and we've all had to support each other through this pandemic. And I kind of feel that although there has been organisational support, it's not perhaps in the same way that I would imagine employed colleagues are being treated.
Yeah. Sonali?
I think, one thing that I've found is that I'm having conversations with people I never dreamed that I would ever even meet in any way. And that has, I guess that certainly built up confidence in a different sense. For instance, last night I was co-hosting an online seminar with Q&A with Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, and various other metro mayors around the country. I've been having conversations with Annalise Dodds and Ed Miliband. We're trying to reach the Treasury at the moment, and looks like we might have a way in as of this morning. These are conversations I never dreamed of having with people, or people in these kind of positions. And I suppose that has been empowering in a certain way. On the other hand, looking at the sort of excluded UK community more broadly, and not sort of talking about myself so much, but others, what we have seen is that we might have this rapidly growing Facebook group that currently stands at 25,000, but the number of people who are active and who are speaking out and who are being vocal and making noise is about 300. There are many people within the networks who are silent. And people do tell us that is out of fear. Out of fear for a number of reasons. Equally, people feel very isolated. I think the sense of isolation is inherent within the pandemic experience anyway. But given the very harrowing experiences that many people are going through right now, I think isolation has become a major issue, and that's obviously fed into this growing mental health crisis. So I think there are sort of two sides to that, but there's no doubt that there has been a certain element of empowerment in it, because I'm having conversations that I never dreamed I would ever have with people.
Christina?
Yeah, I think when we started 5 years ago, we were really reluctant to put our heads above the parapet in the more lobbying activist sphere, and we're just trying to bring the community together, because I think we didn't want to get a reputation for being really awkward, because we still have to get freelance work in the sector. But I think, and I think actually coupled with that, I don't feel comfortable with being the voice for freelancers, because I think, like Jo said, there's such a range. You do it for a range of reasons. You've got different backgrounds, perspectives, all sorts of things that I don't feel comfortable that I am the voice. But I think now we have the survey, so it's there. It's not our opinions. It's there in black and white that we can build on that. And I think also I've just got to the stage where, well, if not me, who? because like Sonali says, not everyone is prepared to do it. You know, I've probably spent more time on Museum Freelance in a voluntary capacity this year than I have on my client work or trying to get more work. You know, it's been like a massive labour of love. And that also comes from a place of privilege, that for various reasons, I have a place of privilege. So I think it is easier for me to be one of the ones who speaks up on behalf of other people who are just not in that position where they can't for a variety of reasons. So I kind of feel that responsibility as well. But I think coming together, like our LinkedIn group now has 1,300 members. So, you know, I think once you start getting the numbers behind you and that research there, you feel that that sort of gives you momentum and the legitimacy, I think, to raise the issues you want to raise.
Yeah, I think that point about legitimacy is really important. And actually, you reminded me of something I wanted to ask you all when I was preparing for this panel. I was, you know, it was kind of on my mind a lot. And I listened to the New Economics Foundation podcast, and the last episode in the recent series was about hope. And kind of finding hope in, you know, amidst the pandemic and its kind of fallout. And I was sort of blown away by one of the speakers, Fazana Khan, who has set up and works for Healing Justice London. And I've tweeted some links in advance to this, and I'll do it afterwards as well. But it was just, I mean, the discussion was much bigger than the bits that I felt touched on what I was thinking about specifically about freelance. But there was the thing that really struck me about a kind of making a commitment to hope, and hope being something that you have to practice, and it's different to optimism, and it's something you make a commitment to, but that also we need to be really careful in terms of sort of collective care about the pace at which we're trying to bring about change, kind of act on our work. There was this discussion in the episode about, you know, how we've been in emergency mode for too long, sort of can't sustain that sort of level of heightened energy, and that it will lead to burnout. And so I suppose the way I'm turning this into a question for the three of you is what the longer term hopes really. Joe's already said you don't want to be here this time next year having the same conversation. Absolutely agree with you there. So Sonali, what in terms of Excluded UK, what are you hopeful for longer term, or how do you see or hope to be able to kind of sustain the campaign?
When we set up back in May, obviously that was several weeks after lockdown had happened, so we'd already been kind of immersed in campaigning in certain ways up until that point. And the reason why we emerged then was because, I suppose in a similar vein, we felt that this was going to be a long-term battle. And so going back to some of the points that I raised earlier, it's not just about having been excluded from these two particular schemes. I think the whole issue of the exclusions that have come about in the schemes has brought into sharp focus many sort of fundamental issues around working conditions of freelancers, around welfare, and many other things. So we always saw Excluded UK as being sort of on one hand a lobbying organisation, and on the other hand a support mechanism. And the support activities sort of side of our work has kind of developed in tandem with that. So we've managed to fundraise to put together a programme of fully funded mental health one-to-one sessions, and all sorts of other forms of business advice, debt support, and so on, with a whole range of collaborations. And I think that's where we see the sort of longer term side in sort of relating to support, as in being a support mechanism for what is a huge proportion of society. I mean, 10% of the UK workforce is staggering, even if we're in contact with, loosely speaking, 25,000, but that is growing all the time. So yes, I think the support mechanism and those activities kind of goes hand in hand with the noise that we're making on the lobbying side.
Yeah. Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that, I think if we're going to take positive things out of this year, I think this year has sped up a load of issues that have been just bubbling under the surface, and they have really thrust them into the limelight. And I think certainly in our sector, forced organisations to sit up and take notice. And I'd really like next year to see some kind of real mindset shift that is permanent, where freelancers are just valued, really, because I think just that in itself will lead to so many other positive things that we're after, and that organisations and clients take a bit of responsibility and ownership as well for freelancers' pay and conditions and mental health. That there is just a much more holistic approach to how you deal with freelancers, really, and embed them, I think, in everything you do. I mean, that's kind of my hope for next year, just that freelancers are valued, really.
Yeah. Jo, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to echo what both Sonali and Christina have said, really, I think our hope for DILF is that we can kind of push forward and draft this code of conduct and take it to organisations that are both exhibition and distribution based, and try and move forward and ratify something and get something in place, or at least to start those conversations going, because I think it's going to be a long road before we get to where we want to. Yeah, that's my hope. I think we can all be hopeful about it, absolutely, and we've got to be positive about this situation, and the fact that the four of us are sitting here talking about it as well, I think is really a positive thing, that across kind of creative art sectors, that it's not, things aren't just isolated to certain areas. Yeah, I am hopeful.
Great. Whilst there's a discussion going on in the chat, we haven't had any questions as such. Is there anything you feel that you want to touch on that we haven't drawn out yet? I suppose for me, I'm thinking back to our DILF workshop, and the thing you said earlier, Jo, about freelancers need to be their own HR managers, their finance managers, etc. But specifically about promotion and self-promotion, and what would you all really welcome in terms of promotion that you didn't have to do yourself? I think you're never taught to, or certainly my case was, I was never taught to kind of like stand on a soapbox and kind of shout about how good I might have done a project. I don't think we're very good, or I don't think I'm very good at doing it, but I think you have to naturally do it when you become a freelancer as well. And I think part of the thing is, freelancing is not, it's not just exclusively in the sectors we're talking about today. It's everywhere. It's the gig economy. The way we work and society is shifted and changed. And I don't think we necessarily have those lessons in life of how to navigate that stuff. You kind of fall into it and you rely on the help of others, or resources that are there to kind of get you through. Like Screen Skills has a really brilliant section on kind of film production, freelancing, and all of those bits there. And I think more formal support in those kind of things. So if somebody came out of school or of college or university and decided that they wanted to freelance before, rather than doing an employed role, that there would be some kind of framework there to support them, I think is something that I'd quite like to see. Not really sure I answered the question there. Classic politician thing. Sonali.
But actually, just picking up on that, when I do bits of teaching to university students, I frequently get asked, the usual question of how can I get my foot in the door in the film industry, but not as a freelancer. I don't want to be a freelancer. I want a job. I want paid. I want to be an employee. I want employment. I hear this time and time again, and maybe there's a bit of education to do in a broad sense around what it is to be a freelancer and the huge positives of being freelance. I certainly couldn't imagine going back to where I was 15 years ago. Yeah, and on the other side of the sort of broader education around what it is to be a freelancer, I mean, that goes back to the sort of political lobbying side. I guess there could be more awareness around the true realities of being freelance. But yeah, certainly the benefits of it, because there certainly are.
Well, yeah, that's a good prompt actually, because certainly when we talked on the phone, Christina and I did touch on this kind of like, why the hell do you do it then? Like, why do we do it? I feel quite often, you know, sort of, I suppose, get asked that question and then think, well, no, but there are lots and lots of reasons why I don't think I'd go back. And do you feel the same? Do you want to close with some of your own kind of positives about being freelance? I'll go to Christina first.
Yeah, I can't imagine not freelancing now. For me, it's just become embedded in my lifestyle, and the benefits of just that flexibility, the freedom, the variety. It's just exciting, you know, that does really outweigh the bad stuff. I think there was just someone just picked up in the chat about maybe perceptions in terms of, I think we are ingrained from an early age of what success looks like. And I think what's really useful as a freelancer is to take a step back and sort of set your own measures of success. You know, it doesn't have to, you know, for some people it might be a 6-figure salary and fame, notoriety, whatever the accolades. You know, for someone else it actually might just be something that's creative, that inspires them, that stimulates them, is enough to pay the bills, maybe allows them to do the school runs, you know. So I think whatever it is, it's individual to each individual. And I think that's the key, really, just like ignoring the noise, you know, not focusing and being too disturbed by what other people are doing, and just really boiling it down to what it is you want to get out of freelancing. And I think once you have those objectives or those goals or aims, then, you know, that's what you can go after. And I think it's easier then to take those steps and yeah, like I say, sort of drown out the noise of everyone else.
Jo?
I'd absolutely agree. There are lots of benefits, and I think I've got to work with an amazing range of people on various different projects, and kind of built up a network of colleagues and friends that I wouldn't have done if I'd stayed in an employed role. I've got to try lots of different things, and really expanded my skill set. And then I've been able to be on this panel today and, you know, talk about advocating freelancing more, because I think, you know, as we picked up upon, you know, we are kind of, it's ingrained into us to have a job, to be secure, to have a home, all of these things. And actually, in terms of a work-life balance, that's not always what's needed.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Christina and Jo have just said. Flexibility certainly is something that I value hugely. But I suppose equally, being open to opportunities and possibilities. And I think one thing that I particularly enjoy about being freelance is creating my own project, and having the freedom to do that, and being creative in the way that I work, essentially.
That's a lovely thing to end on. Thank you, Sonali. And I can see Maddie here. So I just thank you all for taking part today, and to everybody who listened and contributed.